Hey guys, welcome back to the Guilty as Charged podcast. Very happy to be joined by a special guest, a fellow Blue Wire podcaster, if you will, Kenny King, who covers the Raiders for Just Blog Baby, as well as the co-host for the Raider Cody podcast. Kenny, thanks for joining me, man. How you doing today?
Thanks for having me, Steven. It's feeling good, man. Feeling good. I had a good day at practice, going through the Twitter feed and excited about this season.
Are you have you been able to go to any of the Raiders practices?
I haven't yet. So I'm still in California.
Okay.
I plan on going out to a few practices once season starts and I get some time out there. But I also plan on being at a lot of the games. So that's the beauty of, being an hour flight away. So it's not too much traveling. And then we also have the Niner game in a couple of weeks on here. So we'll get to see him out in California.
There you go. I assume you'll be at the Monday Night Football game then.
Oh, I've had this thing circled since the schedule came out, man. I'm fired up about it.
Yeah, that's gonna be an awesome game for sure. So we're here to talk about the Raiders, and we're here to talk about the biggest storylines. And I think it's only fair that we talk about the Chargers stealing, if you will, that has gone on for the Raiders this year. Of course, with Gus Bradley and Casey Hayward. So what's the latest with Bradley? What are you hearing about his new defense and just kind of your general grasp of the Raiders' defensive makeover overall?
Look, I mean, Bradley's a breath of fresh air for Raider Nation. We had Paul Gunther for the past couple of years. He just kind of ran that defense into the ground. He's a very smart coach. He's just not a guy that can put it all together on the field and lead those guys. Bradley's the kind of guy, and you guys know this as Charger fans, Bradley's the kind of guy that's going to rally around the team. The team's going to rally around him. He's going to get guys excited. And that's what we're seeing from this defense is guys are flying around. They're getting after it. They're in a more of a base defense, but we already saw in the preseason game, he's getting after it a lot more than Paul Gunther ever did with Nate Hobbs having a quarterback blitz. We're seeing, more stunts on the front and the defense. So it's exciting to see because it seems that we finally have a defensive coordinator. The Raiders had a joint practice with the Rams today. And from the reports that I saw from Tashawn Reed from The Athletic is the Raiders defense was getting after it as well. So I think they had 3 picks on Matthew Stafford. Obviously it's practice, but it was the first team against the first team. So it's things to get excited about.
Yeah, and I think if you talk to other Chargers fans, you'll hear the same kind of thing. Players love him, fans not so much. It was definitely a relationship that soured over time. But the one thing we always know about Gus Bradley is he is a player's coach. Everybody who plays for him loves him, except for Jalen Ramsey, weirdly. But I think that's going to be good for the Raiders, like you mentioned with Paul Gunther. And I think the secondary is kind of the biggest question mark that I have from the outside.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about the Raiders secondary? Obviously, we know Casey Hayward very well, but who else is kind of standing out in that group so far?
A guy that's standing out right now is Trayvon Merrick, the rookie safety out of TCU. He's a guy that, actually I had mocked going first. He was a guy that I really wanted to get. So when we got him in the second round, I was really excited about it. But yeah, you're right. Casey Hayward has kind of come in and been that veteran leader in the secondary. The Raiders still have a really young secondary, and there's a lot of question marks around it. You've got Jonathan Abram, who's in year 3. Realistically, it's year 2 for him. He didn't play his first year after getting injured in the Denver game. So the question marks around him, can he play? And putting him in the box seems to be a better fit for him. You don't want to have him as a single high safety. He's just not that guy. Trayvon Mullen is another guy who we would like to see make leaps in his 3rd year. He had a really good first year. His 2nd year, he had a bit of a sophomore slump. So hopefully he can bounce back this 3rd year. I think the biggest question mark in this defense is Damon Arnett, 2nd-year player, was a first-round pick last year. He's gotten moved to the 2nd team already. You've got Casey Hayward in front of you, so you're not going to start there. But I think the biggest question is he a guy that can buy into the system, that can be smart and can make smart plays? He made a couple pass breakups during the game. He made a couple in practice, but is he a guy that can be consistent? So I have a lot of question marks around the secondary. I know that Ron Miles is a very well-respected coach. He's done a great job with the secondary. I mean, I saw what he did with the Chargers. And the thing with you guys is you guys had a really good defense, even with guys being out. I think if I'm correct, you had like 17 guys that were on the injured reserve list last year, and you still had a pretty good defense, and that's missing some of your top players. And so, if you can get if you can get somewhat productivity out of this, the Raiders are going, they're a bottom ranked defense. They were, I think, 29th to 30th. And so if you can even get a middle of the pack defense, that's what we're looking for. That's what you hope, because you have an offense that can put up points. But the secondary is going to be the lifeblood of this. And that's really where the question mark is for me.
Yeah, a lot of Chargers fans will tell you that they were hoping that Pep Hamilton would, quarterbacks coach would stick on with the new staff, but I was really hoping that Ron Miles would.
Yeah.
And Miles, the Chargers never really gave him like a first round pick or a second round pick to kind of like work with, but he deserves a ton of credit for, the emergence of Michael Davis and Trevor Williams before him and Jason Verrett before him. So Ron Miles is definitely, a high end position coach. I hope some team eventually gives him a shot to be a coordinator. So I think more so than hiring Gus Bradley, I think Ron Miles is going to be a really good addition for the Raiders.
Yeah, definitely huge. I think that, Miles working with Bradley, working with these young guys, it's exciting. I think the other thing with Bradley is Bradley's had a lot of success with young DBs. We saw what he did in Jacksonville. We saw what he did in Seattle. We saw what he did in LA and San Diego. So those are some of the things that excite us about Raider fans. But as a Raider fan, you always have to be cautiously optimistic. You don't want to get too high and say the Raiders are going to win the Super Bowl, because the Raiders will always they'll always let you down. But you also don't want to be completely down on them and say, well, the Raiders aren't going to do anything, because then the Raiders surprise you. And so for me, it's always cautiously optimistic. I want them to be good. I want to win the division. I want to beat KC. But at the same time, we have to be, things could happen a different way. So.
Yeah, that's definitely how I approach my fandom with the Chargers as well. Every single year, except for 2018, I was like, this team's going to be amazing. And then, unfortunately got crushed by New England. So let's shift gears and talk about the offense. I think the biggest question mark on that side of the ball is obviously the offensive line, losing Gabe Jackson and Rodney Hudson. And then, of course, you draft Alex Leatherwood. So what's the current status of the Raiders offensive line? And do you think people might be a little bit surprised at how well this group plays this year?
I actually think they will be surprised. And obviously, we haven't played any games. And so when you have a preseason, it's very hard to get a read on guys because you don't have your full starting line in. But there are some veterans on that offensive line that are really good leaders. You've got Richie Incognito, who I know Richie gets a bad rap, but he's actually a really good leader, and he's well respected on the team. You've got a guy like Denzel Good, who's come back from last year, who bounced around on the line. He played guard, he played tackle, he filled in wherever he was needed. Colton Miller, who's really come into his own, is a top 15 tackle in my opinion. But yeah, you have Andre James, who's replacing one of the greatest centers in the league right now, Rodney Hudson, and then you have Alex Leatherwood, who's replacing a guy who at one point when he plays can be the best right tackle in the league.
Yeah,
but Trent Brown didn't play much last year. Leatherwood he's a different type of player because he's hard-nosed and he's going to get after it, and he's going to be a guy that can drive the pile, especially in run blocking. And he fits Tom Cable's zone blocking scheme. I think that was one of the things that Gabe Jackson and Trent Brown didn't do well. They didn't fit that run blocking scheme, and that's where we saw some of the fall off last year in the run game. Late in the season, Josh Jacobs didn't have the kind of yardage that he had the prior year. So I think that's where they're going to have some success. But at the same time, it's going to be some growing pains as well. You're going to have Andre James and Derek Carr. They need to get on the same page. They need to get together. They need to make sure that they're doing the right things to call out those lines, because Rodney was like another quarterback on the field. He's calling out the defenses. He's telling the line what to do, what's coming. He's Derek's eyes and ears out there. And so Andre James has a lot of maturing to do. And, luckily he's got Richie right next to him to help him with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Richie is going to be huge for him. And I think I'm excited about Alex Leather. I think a lot of people gave them some slack for the draft, but I liked Leatherwood and I like Trayvon Merrick. So I feel like, a lot of people are saying like, if you would have just flipped those picks, then a lot of people would have been more happy. But ultimately the players are the players. And I think both of them will make strong impacts for the Raiders. So you mentioned Josh Jacobs. Of course, the Raiders went out and got Kenyon Drake this year as well. Kind of a head scratcher, that decision to get Kenyon Drake, but what can we expect from the Raiders running game this year?
Well, I can tell you. So outside looking in, it's a head scratcher. But anybody that knows Jon Gruden, anybody that knows the Raiders' success, the Raiders have always had success with dual running backs. You look at Darren McFadden and Michael Bush. You look at Charlie Garner and Tyrone Wheatley. You look at, also with Tyrone Wheatley and Napoleon Kaufman, Marcus Allen and Kenny King. So they always had that two back set where there was two guys that could carry the load. He's a guy that in college, he never got a ton of carries. He was the third back. He didn't get a ton of carries. Jon Gruden doesn't want to run Josh Jacobs into the ground early. Josh is a special player. He's the first Raider in Raider history to have back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, believe it or not. And so that right there is a feat in itself. But at the same time, or he's also the first Raider rookie to rush for over 1,000 yards. But what Gruden wants to do on this offense is he wants to open it up. He wants to compete with the Kansas City, right? Where you don't just have a one-dimensional offense where you throw the ball, short passes and you run the ball. He wants to be able to get the running backs involved in the running game. He wants to be able to do the West Coast hybrid offense where you're going to have some short passes, you're going to have some deep throws. You're going to keep the defense on their toes. Kenyon Drake brings that because he brings speed and he brings really good hands to the backfield. You got Josh Jacobs, who's really good as well, but he's got hands, but he's not a guy that's thought of as a receiving threat. So Josh is kind of that sneaky guy that, can go in there in times and, he'll catch something out of the backfield, but he's going to be more of that power back coming out of the backfield. And so that's where you kind of see the differences there. And then you throw in guys like Alec Ingold. You look at Trey Regis, who had a really good first preseason game. And then there's the question marks with Jalen Richard, who, quite frankly, I don't think he's going to make the team.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting one to keep an eye on. And I think Theo Riddick retired, didn't he? Just barely?
Yeah. Well, so, yeah, Richard and Riddick both went on the COVID list. Riddick retired, and Jalen Richard, then hurt his foot. And so he's out for maybe the season. But the thing with Richard is also a guy who's been very outspoken against vaccines, not just the COVID vaccine, but vaccines in general. Like he said, he's not getting his kids vaccinated. He's very outspoken on Twitter about it. And so given kind of the direction that everything's going, the Raiders, go in their direction with the mandatory vaccinations, the league, with the forfeiture of games, I could see Jalen Richard being as a camp casualty.
Yeah, it slowly seems that players who are against the vaccine have either come around or they're probably trending towards getting cut because it's just, teams can't afford it unless, your name is Kirk Cousins or Lamar Jackson. But that's another thing. So obviously we all know what the Raiders have in Darren Waller. Unfortunately, one of the best tight ends in the league from our perspective, of course. Very, very great player. Had him in fantasy a couple of years ago. Was awesome. But outside of Darren Waller, who do you think becomes that reliable number 2 for Derek Carr this year?
Brian Edwards. Brian Edwards is a guy that I've gone on probably 5 different podcasts in the past 2 weeks, and you can ask anybody. Brian Edwards is my guy. So I've got 2 guys that I'm rallying hard for. Brian Edwards and Foster Moreau. Those 2 are guys that I think are going to have breakout seasons. Foster, his rookie year, I think he had 5 touchdowns. They were all in the red zone. He's a big red zone target. Tight end out of LSU. I think the Raiders have the ability to have the number 1 tight end tandem in the NFL. And that's facts. So that's not anything homerism or anything. You got Darren Waller, who's a top 3 tight end. You got Foster Moreau, who's, relatively unknown, and he's gaining traction. But Brian Edwards, I think, is going to be that guy. And it's not the T.O. comparisons. It's not the Devontae Adams comparisons. It's not the Randy Moss. It's the fact that the guy is 6'3", 220. He's fast. He's physical. He goes up there and get a jump ball, and he runs solid routes. On top of that, he's been working out with Derek all offseason, and they've been working on their time, and they've been working on their chemistry. Derek trusts him. And the thing with Derek is if Derek trusts the receiver, that receiver is going to eat. He had that trust with Nelly last year. He had that trust with Crabtree for all those years. And that's where you're going to see a guy eat. And I think that Brian Edwards is going to be that guy.
Yeah, so if you're into fantasy football, guys, it sounds like you buy some Brian Edwards and Foster Moreau. Maybe outside of those 2, who could you see having like a breakout season for the Raiders?
Offensively or defensively?
Let's go defense since you just talked about Brian and Foster Moreau.
Defensively, I would say, I think that a breakout season, I don't know if you can call it a breakout season because his first season he had double-digit sacks, but I would say Max Crosby. I think that Max is going to feast having Yannick on the other side. You finally have a pass rush again. The Raiders made the colossal mistake of trading Khalil Mack and having one of the greatest pass rushers in the game over to Chicago and not really getting a lot for it. Obviously we got Josh Jacobs out of it. We got Jonathan Abram, but you don't know what you got with that. And you take Cleveland Farrell at 4. I'm a big Cleveland Farrell supporter. I think that Cleveland's a solid player, but he's a casualty of where he was drafted. Right. If he was drafted at 24, if they had swapped the Josh Jacobs and Cleveland Farrell picks, we wouldn't be having the Cleve Farrell conversation. But because of where Cleve was picked, that's where we have the issues. But I think Max is going to be a guy that's really going to come into his own this year. Last year, he battled with addiction. He battled with some things during the offseason, some injuries during season. But I think that Max is going to be a guy that can really flourish in Bradley's system and can actually buckle down and could be one of the top defensive ends in this league.
Some strong words for all of those players. Hopefully, from you guys' perspective, that those are able to pan out. And I do agree. I think Cleveland Farrell's a solid player. It's just,
he's not a fourth overall pick.
Yeah. But I do agree. I think he is a solid player. So, Kenny, we'll get you out of here on this, man. This has been awesome. What do you think defines a successful season for the Raiders this year? And how do you see kind of that playing out in terms of the AFC West?
Raiders have to make the playoffs. I mean, a successful season, when you talk about, in your with Jon Gruden in his 4th year, when you talk about Derek Carr in the 4th year of the system, year 8, 1 year of the playoffs, brand new stadium in Vegas. You went 2-6 at home last year. You have to make the playoffs. And you don't have to just make the playoffs. You got to get deep. It's not just, hey, make it to the wild card and lose the wild card. No, you got to, if you make it to the wild card, win the wild card round, make it to a divisional round, make some noise in the playoffs, get in there deep, have your quarterback in the MVP conversation, have your tight end, Darren Waller, in some kind of conversation for offensive player of the year. You have to have conversations around that team and you have to get deep into the playoffs. And if you don't, that's not a successful season. Yes, Raiders have improved every year under Jon Gruden. Now it's to take that next step. You can't have a 6-4 record and then fall off halfway through the season. You have to keep going, have to keep your foot on the gas. You got to beat KC. The Raiders beat KC in KC last year.
Yeah.
Almost swept KC. And because of one boneheaded play, they ended up losing that game. And so you have to beat KC. You got to beat teams in the division. You can't lose to Denver. Denver doesn't have a quarterback. So if you let Denver be, I talked about this on Veterans Minimum, is Denver is kind of like a gimme on the AFC West schedule, right? They don't have a quarterback. You got Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater. So if you can beat Denver, every team in the AFC West should be able to sweep Denver. Unless you're playing Denver last game of the season and you rest your starters, you should be able to beat Denver.
Yeah.
But you got to fare well against AFC West opponents. I think that's the biggest thing. But at the end of the day, a successful season is the playoffs. A very successful season, obviously, a Super Bowl. And, we'll see from there.
Yeah, obviously got to get on the field. Very high expectations for the Raiders. In terms of the Broncos, I will say, for the Charger side of things, for whatever reason, they cannot win in Denver. Like, even when LT and Rivers were in their primes, winning in Denver was just, impossible. So, I will never predict a sweep over the Broncos for the Chargers. For whatever reason, it's just, one of those things that can't work out. But
that's like us. That's like us in KC. I mean, the Raiders just never had success. Even with Gannon and Rice and Tim Brown, we didn't have success in Arrowhead. So it's just it all depends on, except for last year. I mean, hey, but in Derek Carr's 8 years, that was the first win that we've had in Arrowhead.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited about this season, in part because I feel like the Chargers and Raiders both are kind of on the same level of they need to win this year.
Yeah.
They probably are kind of right in that same, 10 plus wins for the season, hopefully. And the AFC in general, man, it's loaded. So it's going to be a fun race to watch. Where can Chargers fans find you on Twitter? I'll just let you plug your podcast because you do a lot of work for Blue Wire podcast. So where can Chargers fans give a listen if they want some intel on the Raiders?
All right, Charger fan. I troll a lot, so don't come here. Don't come here with a weak heart. But you can catch me on Twitter at Kenny King _Jr. You can check me on Blue Wire. I have my own pod, Real Talk with Kenny King Jr. Anywhere podcasts are found. I also am the co-host of the Raider Cody podcast. I'll be doing some stuff with him out in Vegas as well. And then also you can check me on YouTube. It's just Kenny King Jr. But I'm a pretty good follow. I mean, I've got some Chargers that follow me. That we have good fun banter interactions. I troll pretty hard.
Oh, it's all good, man. It's all in good fun. You had Sean Merriman on your show, didn't you?
I did. That was a fun one. Sean's become a pretty good friend of mine. Sean's a good dude.
He is a good dude. I don't know if you've seen his I forget what they called, but he does like a beer pong questions with the players.
Yeah.
For the Chargers. I don't know if you've seen that, but that's been some awesome content for us to watch.
Yeah. He's got a couple pods of his own, and he does the thing for the Chargers. He's a good dude. He's got his hands on a lot of stuff. He's another guy that likes to troll. So I think that's where me and Sean kind of built that friendship, is that like we have the same kind of sense of humor and the same kind of personality where we're gonna dig at you. But that's what football's about. Football's about having fun. Fanatic is short for fan. And if you're not having fun, then what's the point of even talking about it?
Exactly, man. Especially, the Sean, his visit to Allegiant Stadium, that was a funny troll for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I got him back on that one too.
Oh, good. All right, man. Well, this has been great. Chargers fans, make sure and give him a follow. Obviously, we know the intel on the division rivals is always something to look forward to throughout the season, and we wish you guys nothing but the best this year. Hopefully you guys are having some successful podcasting numbers as well, and we look forward to chatting with you in the future, Kenny.
Appreciate it, man. Anytime.